Welcome to the Sunday Signal. I'm David Richards, and this is issue 58 for Sunday the 14th of June, 2026. Today's issue is called The Bear and the Fly. I wrote this newsletter on Friday with Claude Fable 5 as my research assistant. It was fast, very fast, and a clear step ahead of anything else I have used. And by Friday evening, the United States government had switched it off. 3 stories this week. The afternoon Washington reached into the most advanced commercial software on Earth and bricked it over a debugging prompt. The same Friday that made Elon Musk the world's first paper trillionaire. And what several thousand years of history tell us happens to societies that let wealth concentrate this far. Let's get into it. Aesop warned us centuries ago about a bear who crushed his master's skull to kill a fly. This week, the United States Commerce Department played the bear, and Claude Fable 5 was the fly. Here is what happened. Friday, 21 minutes past 5 in the evening, Eastern Time, Anthropic, the company behind the Claude models and one of the most valuable private firms on the planet, received a letter from the United States government. Citing national security and export control authorities, the directive ordered it to suspend all access to its 2 most capable models, Fable 5 and the restricted Mythos 5, for any foreign national anywhere in the world, including Anthropic's own foreign national employees. Cloud software does not have borders. You cannot check the passport of every user calling a model through Amazon servers, so the only way to comply was the bluntest one available: shut the models down for everyone, in every country at once. Access to all other Claude models was left untouched. And here is the part that should worry every business now building on AI. The government's stated concern was a jailbreak, a prompt that slips past a model's safety filters. The specific technique it cited by Anthropic's account amounted to asking the model to read a code base and fix any flaws it found. Anthropic reviewed the demonstration and said the vulnerabilities it surfaced were minor, previously known, and discoverable by other public models, including OpenAI's GPT 5.5, without any bypass at all. Developers call reading code and fixing flaws debugging. They do it every day. The government looked at the same capability and saw automated discovery of weaknesses in critical infrastructure, a cyber weapon in commercial clothing. Recall the fable: a tame bear guards its sleeping master. A fly lands on the man's face, and the bear, meaning only to protect him, picks up a rock and brings it down on the fly. The fly dies, so does the master. The moral Aesop left us is that misguided zeal can do the work of malice, and that the cure is sometimes worse than the disease. Washington wanted to swat a narrow vulnerability. It used an export control sledgehammer, and in a single stroke it disabled the most advanced commercial software in the world for hundreds of millions of users, crippling an American champion on the eve of its stock market debut. The fly is dead. Look what happened to the master. Anthropic is complying and says it disagrees. Its public position is sharp. Recalling a model used by hundreds of millions of people over one narrow jailbreak sets a standard that, applied across the industry, would essentially halt all new model deployments for all frontier model providers. That is the chilling line for anyone running a company. If Washington can flip the kill switch on a Friday afternoon over a routine debugging prompt, then no enterprise can treat frontier AI as stable infrastructure. You do not build a factory on land the state can repossess without notice. And here is the part that should keep Anthropic's bankers awake. The company closed a $65 billion funding round in late May at a valuation near $965 billion and filed confidentially days later to go public in what would be the first near $1 trillion AI listing. That valuation rests on a simple promise: that the company can keep shipping frontier models and charging a premium for them. Fable 5 was the proof. Friday added a new line to the risk register that no prospectus has ever had to carry. Sovereign recall. What exactly are you worth if the product that justifies the valuation can be removed from the market by a letter at 21 minutes past 5 on a Friday afternoon? Now rewind a few hours to before that directive landed. While the markets were still open that Friday, the state let a milestone pass without a murmur. SpaceX priced its public offering at $135 a share and began trading on the Nasdaq. The company sold more than 555 million shares and raised $75 billion, the largest flotation in stock market history, nearly 3 times the size of Saudi Aramco's record. The offer valued the company at $1.77 trillion. Then the market got hold of it. The stock closed its first day up 19% at almost $161, pushing the valuation above $2 trillion and making SpaceX one of the most valuable listed companies on Earth. Now the man, after Friday's jump, Elon Musk's stake in SpaceX is worth comfortably over $1 trillion on its own, and his Tesla holding adds several $100 billion more. His paper wealth has cleared $1.3 trillion. That is north of 4% of American GDP. He retains more than 82% of SpaceX's voting control. One shareholder, one vote that counts. We have been somewhere near here before, and it is worth remembering how it ended. At his peak, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil refined around 90% of America's oil, and his personal fortune amounted to roughly 1.5% to 2% of American GDP. The American state looked at that and decided a republic could not carry it. In 1911, the Supreme Court broke Standard Oil into 34 companies under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The breakup actually made Rockefeller richer in the short term, as his shares in the successor companies soared, but it shattered his structural grip on the economy. Then came the income tax, the estate tax, the gift tax, and 4 decades of deliberate philanthropy. When Rockefeller died in 1937, his personal estate held just $26 million. The fortune that once dwarfed the federal government had been dissolved into universities, foundations, and family trusts. The system was slow and imperfect, but it worked. Here is the uncomfortable truth about 2026. The 1911 hammer does not fit. Antitrust law polices monopolies within a single market. Musk does not run one monopoly. He runs a portfolio of separate dominant positions across entirely different sectors: rockets and global satellite internet, through SpaceX and Starlink, Frontier AI, through XAI, electric vehicles and grid batteries, through Tesla, social data through X. Modern competition law has no simple standard oil remedy for the problem of one person holding commanding influence across many markets at once. The law was built to break up companies. Nobody ever wrote one to break up a person. And rather than restraining this, the machinery of modern markets reorganized itself to accommodate it. Nasdaq rewrote its index rules last month so that the largest new listings can enter its main index after just 15 trading days, scrapping its minimum float requirement in the process. SpaceX floated barely 4% of itself, which means index funds could be forced to absorb tens of billions of dollars of stock mechanically at whatever price prevails. Many pension savers would end up owning SpaceX, whether an active manager chose it or not. This for a company that lost more than $2.5 billion from operations last year. Rockefeller had to fight the state. Musk has the machinery of modern passive markets carrying his bags. The point is not that Musk is uniquely wicked. The point is that the system has discovered how to manufacture Rockefeller-scale power without triggering Rockefeller-era remedies. So what actually happens to societies that let wealth concentrate this far? The answer is uncomfortable because we have a great deal of evidence, and none of it is reassuring. The historian Peter Turchin has spent his career modeling how civilizations decay, and he keeps finding the same mechanism. Mature societies develop what he calls a wealth pump, a structural arrangement that steadily moves wealth from the people who work to the people who own. In Rome, it was conquest and slave labor. In feudal Europe, it was land. In our era, it is asset inflation. And increasingly, it is the replacement of paid human labor with machines that work for the price of electricity. That pump produces 2 effects again and again across the record. The first is mass immiseration. Living standards stagnate for the majority. Social mobility seizes up, and even life expectancy begins to slide. The second is what Turchin calls elite overproduction. As wealth explodes at the top, a society mints more rich, ambitious people than it has positions of power to absorb. The surplus do not retire quietly. They factionalize, they fight each other for the remaining seats, and they wage their wars through politics and the media until the state itself seizes up. If that sounds familiar, it should. When immiseration meets a divided elite, societies break, and the precedents are brutal. The late Roman Republic flooded with slave labor, the ancient equivalent of automation, until ordinary citizens lost their farms and the Republic itself collapsed into civil war. Pre-revolutionary France, where the nobility hoarded the land and exempted themselves from the taxes until the harvest failed and the revolution took their heads along with their property. 19th century China, where extreme inequality helped ignite the Taiping Rebellion, a civil war that killed more than 20 million people. The economic historian Walter Scheidel surveyed several thousand years of this and reached a hard conclusion. Extreme inequality has never once in recorded history been substantially reduced by peaceful market forces. It has only ever been flattened by four kinds of shock. He calls them the four horsemen: transformative revolution, state collapse, mass mobilization warfare, which forced governments to tax the rich at near total rates to fund the world wars, and lethal pandemics. The Black Death killed a third of Europe, and by making labor scarce, it handed the survivors the bargaining power that broke feudalism. The ledger always balances. The only question history leaves open is who pays and how violently. There is one recorded exception, and it is the one that should interest us most. Occasionally, a faction of the elite sees the cliff edge in time and chooses to give up a portion of its own wealth to preserve the system that created it. The clearest modern case is America in the 1930s. Facing depression and the real threat of revolution, Franklin Roosevelt, himself a child of the elite, built the New Deal. Aggressive antitrust enforcement, empowered unions, a welfare state, and top tax rates that eventually passed 90%. It engineered the Great Compression that built the 20th century middle class without a shot being fired, and it is very nearly the only time in the entire record that the off-ramp was taken. Now look at the pump we are building. If AI substitutes for human labor at scale, it funnels the value of both muscle and mind permanently upward to whoever owns the compute. That is not a side effect of the technology. It is the business model, which makes the only question that matters a simple one. Are we heading for Roosevelt's exit or one of the other four? And what would Roosevelt's exit even look like now? The policy debate is already circling three ideas: a compute tax, levying the chips and the electricity that power AI, though that risks taxing the steel of this industrial revolution and crippling everything downstream; a robot tax, charging firms at the point; an AI agent replaces a human department; and structural capital reform, doing the unglamorous work the 1930s did, taxing capital gains like income, closing the inheritance loopholes, reaching the unrealized paper fortunes that make trillionaires possible in the first place. None of the three is simple. All of them are easier than the horsemen. Now, the comforting story about the AI boom is that it mints brilliant founders. The story is wrong. The founders are being diluted out of their own revolution, and the wealth is pooling somewhere far less accountable. Sam Altman holds no equity in OpenAI. Dario and Daniela Amodei hold low single-digit stakes in Anthropic. Why? Compute. Training frontier models devours capital at a rate no industry has ever seen. And when you must raise tens of billions of dollars a year just to keep the servers running, you sell your company piece by piece to whoever has tens of billions of dollars. Anthropic raised $30 billion in February and another $65 billion by late May, $95 billion in under 4 months. The scientists get the bylines, the funds get the company. So follow the money to where it actually settles, the infrastructure layer. Sovereign wealth funds have committed an estimated $120 billion to data centers, chips, and compute. Abu Dhabi's investment vehicle co-led a $40 billion acquisition of a major data center operator alongside BlackRock. Saudi Arabia launched a state company to build its entire national AI stack, with Nvidia and Qualcomm signed up. The Gulf's sovereign funds together manage close to $6 trillion, and they are running the most coherent strategy on Earth. Convert oil money into compute, because compute is the commodity every AI company must buy, regardless of which one wins. They have worked out that they cannot out-engineer the founders, so they have become their landlords instead. Set Britain's response beside that. A sovereign AI fund launched in April with £500 million. France assembled a package worth more than €100 billion. The Gulf deploys more than Britain's entire fund in a single building. Britain helped invent much of this field. We are now negotiating for a seat in the cheap stands. Hold the whole picture in your head. The founders are diluted. The engineers are salaried. The state is outbid. What remains is a new class of owner, the institutional landlord of the machine economy. When the historians of the 2030s ask who captured the value of the AI revolution, the answer will not be the people who built it. It will be the people who owned the buildings it ran in. Which brings me to my column in this week's Yorkshire Post, and the strangest twist of the week. Anthropic builds some of the most capable AI models on Earth. This month it disclosed that more than 80% of the code merged into its own systems is now written by its AI, not its engineers. Push that trend a little further, and you reach the point where machines design their successors with humans barely in the room. The industry calls it recursive self-improvement, and then recall what the government cited to justify the shutdown. Fable's skill at reading code and finding flaws. That is the bitter symmetry, the capability that made Fable commercially valuable. Its fluency with code is also exactly what made it politically vulnerable. Weeks before any of this, two of Anthropic's senior figures, Marina Favaro and Jack Clark, published a paper arguing that governments and labs need a credible way to slow or temporarily pause frontier AI development. Their reference point was Cold War arms control with one chilling caveat. Training runs are far easier to conceal than missile silos. Critics scoffed at the timing because a call for a global pause sounds rather different coming from the company in front. Restraint and self-interest were wearing the same coat, and from the outside nobody could tell which one was speaking. Then on Friday, the government paused Anthropic for it, on terms nobody at the company would have chosen. It is one thing for a leader to call for brakes. It is another for the state to rip the wheel away over a debugging prompt. Now put that next to Jensen Huang. The NVIDIA chief told the world there is no fundamental limit to the size of the global economy, and that AI will take global output from $100 trillion to 200, 300, 500. Here is where I land, and where I landed in Doncaster this week. Huang is closer to right than his doubters allow. The acceleration is real, and it will be enormous. But a five-fold economy does not arrive smoothly. It arrives in waves, and waves knock people down. The layoffs have already begun, in software, in finance, in the white-collar trades that thought themselves safe. And the single greatest failure of our politicians is that they have not begun to grasp the scale of what is coming. The investor Naval Ravikant offers the consoling thought, a poor man today lives better than Louis XIV ever did. The Sun King had absolute power, and no antibiotics, no aeroplane, no plumbing worth the name. Technology raises the floor for everyone. In Huang's world, the poorest child carries a tutor and a doctor in her pocket. That is a wonder, and I do not dismiss it. But the floor and the ceiling do not move together. The floor rises. The ceiling vanishes into the clouds. The poorest may live better than the old kings of France, while a handful who own the machines amass fortunes the world has never seen. One of them crossed the $1 trillion line on Friday, at least on paper. That is the bargain on offer. We had better start arguing about its terms. A word on the people at the sharp end of all this. Tech layoffs have hit a near 2-year high, and AI is now the single most cited reason employers give, behind nearly 40% of recent cuts. This week alone, ServiceNow trimmed hundreds of roles while telling staff its own platform was generating the efficiencies. The fintech Pleo cut its product and engineering teams 24 hours after launching a suite of autonomous finance tools, and the outsourcing giant TTAC began shedding around 1,500 frontline support jobs, the classic prelude to an automated voice and chat swap. If compute is becoming capital, labor is becoming the adjustment variable. So here is the final thought. In 1911, the American state looked at one man holding 2% of its economy and understood that concentrated wealth had become concentrated power. The response was slow, imperfect, and contested, but it was a response. This week, the same state did two things on the same Friday. First, it let one man pass the $1 trillion line without a murmur, while the machinery around him bent to help. Then after the bell, it reached into the most advanced commercial software on Earth and switched it off. over a debugging prompt, swatting a fly with a boulder. It found the will to brick an AI model in an afternoon, and no will at all to ask what it means for one person to own a slice of the world. The bear is wide awake about the wrong threat. Several thousand years of records offer societies in this position exactly two endings. In one, a faction of the wealthy chooses Roosevelt's path and surrenders a share of its fortune to save the system that produced it. In the other, the correction arrives by horsemen. Nobody in power is preparing for either. We broke up Standard Oil with a court order. We are building Standard Everything with a tax break. That's it for this week. If you found this useful, the full written issue is waiting for you at thesundaysignal.ai. Do subscribe and follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or YouTube, so the next issue finds you automatically. Until next Sunday, I am David Richards, MBE. Thank you for listening to the Sunday Signal.